It all started with a knock. Not the friendly kind that neighbors use when dropping off a pie or checking in during a storm, but the cold, deliberate rap of someone who means business. On a quiet street in a small American town, an elderly woman named Marlene, who had lived in the same modest, two-bedroom apartment for over 30 years, opened her door to find her landlord standing there, papers in hand, eyes devoid of empathy. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," he said flatly, without even a trace of remorse. No explanation, no conversation, just a notice. And just like that, everything Marlene knew, her comfort, her memories, her safety, was under attack. But what neither the landlord nor the neighbors expected was what she did next. Because when this seemingly fragile woman finally spoke up, she didn't beg or plead. She revealed a truth so powerful, it didn't just change her fate. It changed everything. Stick around, because by the end of the story, you'll know exactly why everyone in that courtroom, judge included, stood up in stunned silence. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something real. Have you ever seen someone try to take advantage of a person who they thought had no power? Maybe it was at work, at school, or even in your own neighborhood. It's a sick feeling, right? That knot in your stomach when someone uses their status, their money, or their position to bulldoze over someone they think can't fight back. This video isn't just about an eviction. It's about that exact power dynamic, how people often underestimate the quiet ones, the elderly, or anyone they assume won't stand up for themselves. But more importantly, this is about a moment where everything flips, where the person you thought had the least power suddenly takes control of the entire situation. And trust me, by the time this story unfolds, you're going to find yourself questioning how much you really know about people and what secrets they might be carrying right under your nose. You didn't land on this video by accident. Something in that title pulled you in, didn't it? Landlord tries to kick out elderly tenant. What she reveals stuns everyone. It hints at a mystery, something hidden, something that feels deeply unfair, but also promises a twist, a revelation. And let me tell you right now, you're going to get your answer. You're going to find out exactly what she said and why it left everyone speechless. But more than that, you're going to feel it. Because this isn't just some clickbait headline. This is a real human story. One that could happen to someone you love, your mom, your grandma, or even you someday. That's why I want you to stay with me till the end. This story deserves to be told in full, with every layer peeled back. So don't skip ahead. Don't click away, because the truth is, every second matters. Let's be honest. We live in a time where rent prices are skyrocketing, and tenants across the country are being pushed out of homes they've lived in for decades. Gentrification, legal loopholes, and greedy property developers have made headlines in cities like New York, San Francisco, Austin, and Los Angeles. Elderly renters, especially those living on fixed incomes or Social Security, are some of the most vulnerable. They often go unheard and unseen until something dramatic forces the spotlight onto them. That's what happened here. Marlene wasn't trying to be a hero. She wasn't looking for fame or pity. All she wanted was to live out her days in peace, surrounded by memories and the quiet comfort of routine. But when her landlord showed up with that eviction notice, something inside her shifted. And what followed was a masterclass in resilience, dignity, and a revelation that left everyone, including city officials, completely floored. Let me paint the picture for you. Marlene is 79 years old, a retired school librarian, with silver-white hair always neatly pinned back and a voice so gentle it could calm a storm. She walks with a slight limp, the result of a car accident years ago, and she's the kind of neighbor who still bakes cookies for the kids next door and remembers everyone's birthdays. Her apartment is filled with old books, vintage photographs, and a cat named Winston who naps on the same worn-out recliner every day. To most people, she probably seems like someone who wouldn't or couldn't put up a fight. That's what her landlord thought too. His name is Rick, a 42-year-old real estate investor who recently inherited the property from his late father. Rick had big plans. He wanted to renovate the building, jack up the rent, and lease the apartments to young professionals willing to pay 3 times what Marlene was paying. He saw her as an obstacle, a financial deadweight. So, he made a decision. Get her out no matter what. But here's where things start to twist. Because as the eviction date drew closer and Rick grew more aggressive, cutting off maintenance, ignoring her repair requests, even threatening legal action, Marlene remained calm. She showed up to court dressed in the same simple sweater and pearls she'd worn for years, holding a folder that would change everything. No one knew what was inside. Some thought it might be old rent receipts or a handwritten plea to the judge. But when she opened it and began to speak, the courtroom went from a dull murmur to complete silence. Her story was not only unexpected, it exposed a shocking truth that had been buried for decades. And by the time she finished, even the landlord's attorney looked like he'd seen a ghost. Now, I want you to imagine yourself in that courtroom. Imagine being one of the people who thought she had no shot. Picture her standing there, small in stature, but towering in truth. What do you think she said? What was so powerful, so undeniable, that it flipped the entire case upside down in a matter of minutes? That's what we're building toward. And I promise you, it's going to be worth every second. But here's the catch. This story isn't just about what happened in that courtroom. It's also about why it happened. The years of quiet sacrifice. The community ties. The secrets hidden in plain sight. It's about how a landlord's push for profit almost erased a woman's legacy, and how that woman refused to let it happen. There's a reason this story has gone viral, sparked headlines, and is trending all across YouTube with searches like Tenant Rights 2025, Landlord Eviction Backlash, and Elderly Woman Legal Surprise. Because it taps into something that's very real in America right now, a deep, emotional fear of losing the little stability we have left, and a rising tide of people saying, "Enough. I'm not here to preach, and I'm definitely not here to waste your time. I'm here to tell you the whole truth." And if you've made it this far, that means you're the kind of person who cares. You're not just scrolling. You want to know what happened, why it matters, and how it might affect your own life. So, let's walk through it together. I'll introduce you to the neighbors who rallied around her, the social worker who noticed something odd in the building's paperwork, the young paralegal who risked his job to help her, and the moment the judge asked a single question that made everyone realize this wasn't just a case about rent. This was a case about rights, about history, and about what happens when someone finally says, "You don't get to erase me." So if you're ready, if you're the kind of person who values fairness, who hates bullies, and who believes in standing up for people who've been knocked down, then stay with me. Because the reveal is coming. And trust me, no one saw it coming. But just when it seemed like Marlene had said all there was to say, just when the room thought the story had reached its peak, she reached into her folder and pulled out one final document. The moment she handed it to the judge, his eyes widened. He looked up at her, then over at Rick, then back at the paper. And what he said next made everyone in that courtroom gasp. What was in that document? You're about to find out. In the weeks leading up to that fateful court date, things around Marlene's apartment started to feel different. At first, it was small stuff, the kind of inconveniences that anyone could brush off as coincidence. A broken light in the hallway that no one ever came to fix. The heat mysteriously shutting off during the coldest week of January. A pile of garbage bags left in front of her door, as if someone had dropped them there deliberately. It didn't seem like much on its own, but if you've ever lived in a building long enough, you start to notice when the patterns change, when something in the air shifts. And Marlene felt it in her bones. What made it worse was that her once friendly neighbors had suddenly gone quiet. People who used to greet her with a smile in the lobby now avoided eye contact. Some didn't even open their doors when she knocked. It was as if the building itself had turned its back on her. For someone who had been part of that community for over 3 decades, who had watched the neighborhood evolve from a working-class pocket to a hip, overpriced district crawling with influencers and digital nomads, this sudden isolation cut deep. Yet Marlene wasn't someone who leaned on others easily. She kept to herself, finding comfort in her daily rituals, morning tea at the window, crossword puzzles at the kitchen table, and tending to the little herb garden she kept on the fire escape. But even those small comforts were starting to slip away. One morning, she found her basil plant crushed and scattered on the sidewalk below. That same week, Winston, her aging cat and closest companion, refused to eat for days, hiding under the couch like he sensed something dark lingering. And in the midst of all this, the landlord's behavior grew colder. Rick had stopped responding to calls. His office hours vanished. The building's voicemail was always full. Tenants were quietly being offered buyouts. Some took them, eager to escape. Others resisted, only to find themselves in eviction court weeks later. But no one else's case seemed as urgent or as aggressively pursued as Marlene's. That was the first clue that something wasn't right. Something about her apartment, was worth more than Rick was letting on. There was a rumor going around, one that started with the mailman and spread like wildfire among the few neighbors still willing to whisper behind closed doors. It had to do with the building's history, something buried in old paperwork, maybe a zoning detail or a hidden clause in the deed. One theory suggested that Marlene's unit was actually protected under an outdated rent control regulation, the kind that could lock her rent in place for life and drastically reduce the resale value of the building. Another theory was even more curious. Some believed that Marlene held documents tied to the original construction of the building, paperwork that could prove legal ownership disputes going back 50 years. A few thought she might have ties to the late property owner, Rick's father, who had once been seen chatting warmly with Marlene in the lobby on Sunday mornings. Could there have been a personal relationship? A secret will? An inheritance hidden in plain sight? No one knew for sure, and Marlene wasn't saying a word. But it was clear she knew something powerful enough to make her a threat in the eyes of the new landlord. And that's when strange things really started to happen. Late one night, Marlene heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, unfamiliar. She peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. When she opened the door the next morning, there were fresh scratches on the lock. A maintenance man she didn't recognize claimed he was sent by the building manager to check on the pipes, but when she asked for a work order, he disappeared without a word. Then came the anonymous phone calls, always from a blocked number, always silent on the other end. At first, she dismissed them as spam, but after the fifth call in a single day, her instinct screamed that this wasn't random. She wasn't just being evicted. She was being pushed out by force, cornered like prey. And still, through all of it, she never lost her composure. She was biding her time, collecting her evidence, waiting for the moment when the truth would be undeniable. There was one person who refused to disappear, Jessie, a soft-spoken 24-year-old who had moved into the unit above her 6 months earlier. A college student working nights as a rideshare driver, Jessie had struck up a friendship with Marlene over shared coffee runs and their mutual love of jazz records. Unlike the others, Jessie wasn't afraid to help. He began taking notes, watching the building's comings and goings, even recording odd conversations in the stairwell late at night. One day, he saw Rick in a heated argument with a man in a tailored suit, someone Jessie swore had an accent and mentioned development plans. A week later, that same man was spotted walking through the building with a clipboard, snapping photos of the units on Marlene's floor. That was when Jessie knew something was being orchestrated, something that went beyond a typical eviction. Together, he and Marlene began piecing together fragments of a story that was bigger than both of them, something involving property fraud, hush money, and potentially a breach of federal housing laws. But even with Jessie's help, they couldn't quite put their finger on it. What exactly was Rick after? Why was he targeting Marlene so specifically? There were no official redevelopment permits filed with the city. No public plans. And yet, something felt inevitable, like she was sitting on top of a secret someone was desperate to erase. Adding to the tension, an older man named Doug, one of the last tenants who remembered the building before Rick's father took over, started acting strangely. He avoided eye contact, mumbled to himself in the elevator, and once warned Jessie to be careful who you trust before quickly shuffling away. Was Doug protecting Marlene? Or hiding something of his own? Then there's Janine, the building's part-time super, who once hinted that she knew why Rick was desperate to clear Marlene's unit, but when pressed, she claimed she said too much already and refused to talk again. Each clue led to another question. Each act of kindness was shadowed by doubt. The deeper you looked, the more tangled it became. And yet, despite the weight of all these uncertainties, Marlene remained composed. She filed her responses to the court. She made copies of every document. She spoke softly but firmly. It was almost as if she knew how it would all play out, like she had been preparing for this moment for years. That kind of calm only comes from someone who has lived through real storms, someone who's been underestimated before and learned how to turn the tables at just the right time. The mystery wasn't just about what was in that folder she brought to court. It was about what she hadn't said yet, what cards she still had tucked away. And as Jesse sat beside her in that courtroom, his phone buzzing with messages from other tenants too afraid to come forward, he realized something that gave him chills. The truth wasn't just hidden in documents. It was inside Marlene herself. And whatever it was, it had the power to burn Rick's entire scheme to the ground. And what she said next, well, let's just say it changed everything. So now, here we are, back in that courtroom. The judge's face frozen in shock, Rick growing visibly pale, and Marlene standing still, holding everyone's attention with nothing but the calm strength of someone who knows she holds the truth. But the story doesn't stop here. Because while we've uncovered the whispers, the rumors, the strange behaviors, and the twisted motives, the real revelation, the moment that will make your jaw drop, is still coming. Just when it seemed like Marlene and Jesse were on the edge of connecting all the dots, the unthinkable happened. Her entire case file, the one she'd built piece by piece over the last month, vanished from her apartment. Not just the copies she kept on her dining table, but even the encrypted USB drive Jesse had backed up on his laptop. They were both gone. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks or shattered windows, nothing. It was like someone had slipped in and out without a trace, leaving behind only an eerie silence. Marlene was shaken, not just by the loss, but by the precision of it. Whoever did this knew exactly what to take and how to leave no evidence behind. And that was the most disturbing part. The loss of those documents didn't just set them back. It wiped out nearly all proof they had collected of Rick's manipulation. It was almost surgical, and it suggested that this was no longer just a shady eviction. It was part of something deeper, more calculated. Something that had already reached into places they didn't even know existed. To make matters worse, Jesse started receiving strange messages from burner accounts. At first, it was just veiled warnings. Leave it alone, or you're in over your head. But then it got more personal. One message referenced a private detail about his mother's medical history, something not even public record. Another mentioned the location where he parked his car every night. That's when he knew it wasn't just a warning, it was surveillance. Someone was watching them closely, ready to push back if they got too close to the truth. Jesse suggested going to the police, but Marlene shook her head. She'd seen enough in her life to know that sometimes the people you're supposed to trust aren't really on your side, especially in real estate disputes that involve millions of dollars. If someone was willing to erase evidence so cleanly, they might have people inside the system too. She told him, "We don't need more attention. We need more strategy." It was the kind of resolve that came from surviving worse than eviction. But as strong as she was, it was clear she was scared. She just refused to show it. Then came the appearance of someone no one had seen in years, Martin Langford, a real estate attorney who had mysteriously vanished after a corruption scandal tied to city contracts nearly a decade ago. One afternoon, Marlene received a plain manila envelope in her mailbox. Inside were pages of legal filings dating back to 1994, stamped with Langford's name and signature. Scribbled in the margins of one document was a short note. "He lied to you. Dig into building permit #84321A. No return address. No explanation." But the documents hinted at a forgotten past, one involving the building's original conversion from industrial property to residential units. And within that story was a shocking revelation. Rick's father had used Langford as a legal fixer to quietly skirt tenant protections and bury certain property violations. If that building permit was tied to those old violations, and if Marlene's unit was classified incorrectly from the start, then everything Rick had done since inheriting the building could be legally voided. It could turn Marlene from a vulnerable tenant into the key to blowing the lid off an illegal development scam. But just as they began researching the permit number, a wrench was thrown into the mix. Janine, the building's part-time super and the only person who might have had access to the old maintenance logs and utility records, suddenly disappeared. Her phone was disconnected. Her apartment was cleared out overnight. No one had seen her leave. One neighbor claimed she was taken away in an unmarked vehicle, but no one could confirm it. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. She had mentioned something about the basement files the last time Jesse talked to her, records that were kept in a locked room beneath the building. The same room now conveniently sealed shut with a heavy-duty chain and a new padlock. Marlene was furious. "They're scrubbing the past," she whispered. "One file, one person at a time." Still, there was one possible ally they hadn't considered yet: Doug. The older man who had once warned Jesse to watch who you trust had gone quiet again, retreating into his apartment like he was waiting out a storm. But now, knowing how fast things were escalating, Jesse knocked on Doug's door again, this time refusing to leave until he opened it. When he finally did, Jesse saw something unexpected: a stack of old newspaper clippings on Doug's kitchen table, all about the original sale of the building, union lawsuits, and tenants' rights protests from the 90s. Doug wasn't just a recluse, he was a witness. And possibly a former activist who had been part of a resistance movement to stop the building's conversion decades ago. Doug admitted he knew Marlene from back then. They had both testified in city housing meetings together. But then he looked Jesse straight in the eyes and said, "She doesn't remember everything. Not like I do." When Jesse pressed him for more, Doug clammed up, only muttering, "There's more to this than she knows. And if she digs too far, someone's going to get hurt." It was a bombshell revelation. Was Doug hiding something about Marlene's past? Or was he protecting her from something even worse? Could it be that Marlene herself was unknowingly part of the very scam she was now trying to expose? Jesse didn't want to believe it. But the cracks in the story were beginning to show. And then came the most chilling discovery yet. As Jesse looked through the envelope again from the mysterious lawyer Langford, he found one last folded piece of paper. On it, in bold letters, was a single phrase: "Ask her about the summer of '96. That year had never come up before. Marlene had always spoken about her time in the building in broad strokes, like everything important started when Rick took over. But now, there was a gap, an unanswered chapter in her timeline that might hold the real key to everything. Was she hiding something from Jesse? Had she made a deal all those years ago that was now coming back to haunt her? Or was someone trying to make her look guilty, to stop her from exposing the truth? One thing was certain: this wasn't just a battle for an apartment anymore. It was a high-stakes game of secrets, power, and survival. And just when Jesse thought they had reached the heart of the conspiracy, the lights in the hallway flickered, the building's Wi-Fi went dead, and a loud knock echoed at Marlene's door. Whoever was out there wasn't here to talk. As the heavy knock reverberated through the paper-thin walls of Marlene's apartment, she froze mid-step, her hand hovering inches from the doorknob. Jesse instinctively pulled her back and motioned for silence. The knock came again, firm, deliberate, but somehow measured. Not like someone trying to force their way in, but as if the person on the other side knew exactly who they were here for and expected no resistance. Jesse peeked through the peephole and saw no one. The hallway was eerily empty, lit only by the buzzing fluorescent light that flickered above the stairwell. But when he opened the door cautiously, he noticed a small cardboard package placed directly on the doormat. No address, no markings, just one word scrawled across the top in black marker: Jesse. The box was sealed with red electrical tape, an unusual choice that made his stomach twist. Marlene urged him not to open it inside, but curiosity and urgency won out. Inside was a dusty old mini camcorder, the kind people stopped using over a decade ago, along with a single tape labeled simply, "Watch this before it's too late." They hooked it up to Jesse's laptop, and the video began with static before snapping into grainy footage of a much younger Marlene, standing outside the building during what looked like a city protest in the mid-90s. The crowd around her was chanting, holding signs denouncing illegal tenant evictions and bribery within the city's zoning board. But the camera stayed locked on her. Then the sound kicked in. She was arguing with someone off camera, and suddenly, the lens swung to reveal Rick's father, Leonard. The two were in a heated exchange. He was accusing her of betrayal, of leaking documents to the press. She, in turn, was yelling about the promises he'd broken, about tenants who had been displaced, including a disabled Vietnam vet named Carlos who vanished shortly after complaining publicly. Marlene's voice cracked as she shouted, "I should have gone to the FBI when I had the chance." The clip ended abruptly as sirens blared in the background, and the screen cut to black. The video flipped everything on its head. Marlene had once stood at the front lines of the very fight she claimed to be simply surviving. And, even more confusing, she had clearly been close enough to Leonard to exchange private accusations in public. Jessie couldn't decide what was more alarming, that she never mentioned any of this, or that someone had gone to the trouble of filming it and sending it to him now. Before he could even ask Marlene about the tape, her phone buzzed loudly on the counter. A text message from an unknown number popped up. "You were warned. He doesn't know everything. Shut it down." Jessie looked at Marlene and asked point-blank if she had worked with Leonard in the past. Her silence said more than words ever could. And that silence was interrupted by a call on Jessie's phone from his younger sister, Mia, shaken, crying, and barely coherent. Mia, a paralegal at a downtown law firm, had just gotten off work when she found an envelope under her windshield wiper. Inside was a photograph of her son, taken at his elementary school playground earlier that day, clearly from a long zoom lens. The note included read, "Tell your brother to stop or the boy gets hurt." Mia was terrified, and she had no idea how these people knew about her connection to Jessie, or that she had recently helped him research property records for the building. She had only done it quietly during lunch breaks. But someone was tracking not just Jessie's moves, but those of anyone who assisted him. That's when it hit him. This wasn't a random scare tactic anymore. This was coordinated, and it was escalating. Trying to calm Mia down, Jessie asked if she could meet the next day at a secure location. But as soon as he hung up, Marlene, looking pale and shaken herself, dropped another bombshell. She admitted she had once filed a complaint against Leonard with the city inspector's office, but after a few weeks, the file was mysteriously closed and she was offered a lifetime lease, on the condition that she kept her mouth shut. What chilled Jessie wasn't just that revelation, but the implication that Marlene's lease, the one Rick was now trying to undo, was never meant to be permanent. It was a trap designed to keep her quiet until someone decided the past needed to be cleaned up for good. At this point, Jessie no longer trusted anything at face value. He revisited the video, this time looking at the background details. One frame caught his attention, a man wearing a distinct gold ring with a red stone, standing behind Leonard. The image was blurry, but Jessie was sure he'd seen that ring before. After scrolling through old news archives about the building's past, he found it. A photo from a 1997 city gala, where the same ring appeared on the hand of Councilman Raymond Dixon, a man who, to this day, was still in office and recently voted to approve a redevelopment plan involving Rick's property holdings. Suddenly, the web stretched even farther than they imagined. A sitting city councilman, still pulling strings, possibly involved in burying complaints from decades ago. Meanwhile, Doug, the neighbor who knew too much, suddenly posted a handwritten note on his door. "Do not disturb. I've said all I'm going to say." It was odd, considering he had just begun opening up. Jessie knocked anyway. No answer. But the next morning the note was gone, and so was Doug. His apartment was stripped of personal items. The walls were bare. A neighbor mentioned seeing movers the night before, but no trucks were parked outside. The building's security cameras, suspiciously, had been offline for maintenance for the past 36 hours. That's when Jessie realized that someone wasn't just trying to silence the truth, they were actively erasing every person who might be able to tell it. And worse, they were at least one step ahead, at every turn. Now, with his family threatened, Marlene hiding truths from her past, and Doug gone without a trace, Jessie had to wonder, was this really about a greedy eviction, or had they stepped into the remnants of a long-buried scandal that people were willing to kill for? And just as that question formed in his mind, another unexpected visitor showed up outside Marlene's door. This time it wasn't a knock, it was a soft voice, almost like a whisper. "Please, open up. I know what happened to Carlos, and I have his journal. Jesse didn't even get the chance to ask who was at the door. Before he could reach the knob, Marlene was already opening it, her hand trembling just slightly as she turned the lock. Standing on the other side was a woman in her late 60s with deeply set eyes and a voice that carried more exhaustion than fear. She introduced herself as Lena, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were wrinkled, her shoes mismatched, but clutched tightly in her hands was a weathered leather-bound journal wrapped in plastic. She didn't ask to come in. She stepped over the threshold like someone who had been running for miles and had finally found a moment's shelter. She said she had once lived in the building, years ago, in apartment 7B, the same unit Carlos, the Vietnam vet Marlene had mentioned, used to occupy. The journal, she explained, had been hidden beneath the loose floorboard in Carlos' old room. She didn't find it until she moved out years later, but she was afraid to come forward until now. There are names in here, she whispered, holding it like a bomb. Dates. Places. The kind of things people don't just forget or forgive. As Jesse flipped through the journal, the pages were filled with frantic, scribbled notes, sketches of layouts, phone numbers, even city permit numbers circled with exclamation marks. One entry, dated May 3rd, 1996, read, "Leonard promised he'd protect us. Now, 2 people are gone. We don't talk about apartment 2C anymore. If you're reading this, don't trust the council. Don't trust Rick. The building has ears." Jesse froze. Apartment 2C. That unit had been empty as long as he could remember. The landlord always claimed it was being renovated, but no work had ever been done. The windows were always dark, and no one ever came in or out. Jesse had passed that door 100 times, but now, with Carlos's warning echoing in his head, it took on a whole new meaning. They didn't sleep that night. The paranoia crept in like a slow-moving fog. Every creak in the hallway felt like footsteps. Every flicker of the apartment lights felt deliberate. Jesse double-checked the locks and covered the windows with blankets, but it didn't matter. Around 3:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. Once, sharp and urgent, and then fell silent. When he ran to the peephole, no one was there. But a folded slip of paper had been slid under the door. 5 words, written in red ink. He died for less. Stop. There was no signature, no explanation. Just the weight of that message hanging in the stale apartment air like a noose. The next morning, Jesse called Mia. Her phone rang, and rang until it went straight to voicemail. It wasn't like her to go radio silent, especially with her son. Panicked, he called her workplace. They said she had called in sick that morning, but didn't leave a reason. He tried her home, her neighbor, even the school. Her son had never been dropped off. The pit in his stomach turned to full-blown dread. He raced to her house on the other side of the city, only to find the front door ajar. Inside, everything looked perfectly untouched, too untouched. The TV was still on, frozen on a paused episode of a kids' show. Her purse was on the kitchen table. Her son's school bag was by the door. But they were gone. Not a single sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no mess. Just gone. Jesse reported the disappearance immediately, but the responding officer gave him a strange look after hearing the names involved. He wrote down the report slowly, almost like he already knew the outcome wouldn't lead anywhere. And that's when Jesse noticed the patch on the officer's uniform. District 14. The same district Councilman Dixon oversaw. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a message. Driving home, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling he was being followed. Every car behind him felt too close. Every light seemed to turn green just a little too quickly, as if someone were trying to keep the traffic moving so he wouldn't stop long enough to notice. By the time he parked and got upstairs, his nerves were shot. Marlene tried to talk him down, but something had changed. Jesse wasn't just worried anymore. He was angry. Someone had taken his sister, and that meant the game had changed. He turned to Lena and demanded to know more about apartment 2C. She hesitated, then finally admitted she had once heard strange noises coming from that unit. Voices arguing, sometimes late at night, even though the place was supposed to be empty. Once, she saw a man in a dark coat leaving it through the fire escape around 2 a.m., carrying a duffel bag. She had convinced herself it was just a squatter or a contractor. But now, looking back, she wasn't so sure. Jesse made a decision. He was going to get into that apartment one way or another. And he wasn't going to wait. That night, under the cover of darkness, he used his maintenance keys from his former job in the building to unlock the door to 2C. The inside was chilling. The walls were lined with foam insulation, not for soundproofing but to dampen it. There was no furniture, no kitchen, no lights, just stacks of boxes, file cabinets, and a single desk with a rotary phone connected to an old landline. A camera system lined the wall, but it wasn't for surveillance outside the building. The monitors were aimed at inside apartments. Cameras hidden in smoke detectors, ceiling corners, even air vents. Marlene's unit. Doug's. Jesse's old place. Every screen played footage from the past week, including the moment Marlene had opened her door to Lena. Jesse backed out of the apartment like it was a crime scene because it was. But before he could fully process what he'd just discovered, a dull thud echoed from the floor above. A creaking floorboard. Then silence. Someone was upstairs. Someone who had been watching him the entire time. He ran down the hall, heart pounding, not even sure if he was being chased. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the realization. Everything he thought he knew about the building, the people, even the danger itself, was only the tip of something much deeper, much darker. This wasn't about an eviction anymore. This was about surveillance, political cover-ups, and people disappearing without a trace. And just when Jesse thought it couldn't get more twisted, his phone buzzed. One new message. It was a video. No sender. No caption. Just 30 seconds of grainy footage showing Mia, tied to a chair in a dimly lit room, staring directly into the camera, whispering one sentence. Don't trust Marlene. Jesse stood frozen, his breath shallow and uneven, the glow from his phone screen casting eerie shadows across the dim hallway. The video of Mia had just finished playing, but her last words kept echoing in his ears, words that cracked open everything he thought he understood. Don't trust Marlene. It didn't make sense. Marlene had been the only one standing beside him since the beginning. She'd opened her door when no one else would. She'd put herself in danger. She had comforted him when Mia went missing. She cried when Lena showed up with the journal. But now, Jesse felt a coldness seep into his chest, the kind that comes when the floor falls out from beneath you. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't actually know much about Marlene at all. Not really. She had appeared kind and motherly, always baking something, always watching from her window. But suddenly, her helpfulness felt too perfect, too staged. Jesse didn't want to believe it, but the paranoia, now emboldened by that cryptic warning, drove him to act. As soon as he got back to her apartment, he found the door slightly ajar again. This time, though, Marlene was nowhere in sight. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls, still warm on the stove, as if she'd only just left. But the living room had changed. Something was off. Papers that had once been stacked neatly were scattered now, some burned at the edges as if someone had tried to destroy them in a hurry. Then he saw it, tucked beneath a loose couch cushion, a familiar piece of paper with red ink, the same handwriting as the warning he'd received earlier. Only this one was older, faded, and addressed not to him, but to Councilman Rick Dixon. It read, "Remove her quietly. If she resists, use the fire alarm strategy again. No records this time." It was signed only with a single letter, M. Heart pounding, Jesse turned toward Marlene's bookshelf. It was filled with photo albums, decorative figurines, and a few dust-covered law books. He pulled one out at random, and behind it, wedged between 2 volumes of civil code, was a small black binder. Inside were records, copies of emails, meeting schedules, notes from council meetings. But strangest of all was a file labeled, Operation Quiet Corridor. The date? 1998, the same year Carlos had warned about in his journal. And there, stapled to the front of the file, was a grainy black and white photo of several city officials standing in front of the building. Among them, Jesse gasped, was Marlene. But she didn't look like someone about to retire. She was younger, sharper, wearing a press badge and standing right next to Dixon with her arm around him like an old friend. The caption below read, "Urban Housing Renewal Committee, Project Demeter Launch." Jesse couldn't move. His mind was racing through every interaction, every comment, every piece of advice Marlene had ever given. The way she had subtly steered him away from apartment 2C at first. The way she had discouraged him from going to the media. The way she always knew what was happening before anyone else. Suddenly, the sweet old woman with the soft voice and warm smile wasn't just a neighbor. She was part of the machine. She'd been here all along. Watching. Guiding. Maybe even manipulating.
But why?
Just then, a noise from the back room snapped Jesse out of his daze. A drawer sliding open. Soft footsteps. He turned, heart slamming in his chest, and saw Marlene standing there, calm, collected, and holding a small envelope in her hand. She didn't look surprised to see him there. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she walked over slowly and placed the envelope on the table between them. "I knew you'd figure it out," she said quietly, almost sadly. "I was hoping you wouldn't, but you're your mother's son." Jesse's stomach twisted. What does my mother have to do with this? Marlene sighed and looked down, finally showing a flicker of the guilt she'd hidden so well. Your mother was part of this building's tenant council, long before it was targeted. She fought back against Project Demeter. She went to the press. She had evidence. Real evidence that would have brought down Dixon and his partners. That's why she disappeared. It wasn't a car crash like they told you. She was silenced. Jesse felt like the air had been sucked from the room. He remembered being told his mother died when he was 9. A tragic accident. An unsolved mystery that everyone in the neighborhood seemed too eager to forget. But now it all made sense. The questions that were never answered. The stories that didn't add up. She didn't die. She was erased. And Marlene? She had been part of it. But as Jesse stared at her, fury bubbling in his chest, she pushed the envelope closer. "This," she said, "is what I couldn't do then." It's everything she collected, her copies, her backup tapes, names, money trails, all of it. I kept it hidden in case things ever got out of hand. You have a chance to finish what she started. But you have to know if you go down this road, you won't be able to come back. Jesse took the envelope, hands shaking. Inside were 3 cassette tapes, an old flash drive, and a photograph. In it, his mother stood in front of the building, arm raised in protest, holding a sign that read, "We deserve to live, not be erased." And behind her, barely visible in the background, was a shadowed figure, tall, in a long coat, half his face obscured. Jesse's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that coat before in the footage from apartment 2C. Suddenly, everything changed. This wasn't just about Marlene or the building or even Dixon. It was about a system, one that didn't just threaten lives but rewrote them. Jesse had been looking at this all wrong. It wasn't about eviction. It wasn't about gentrification. It was about memory, power, and people who believed they could control both. And then the phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, calm, cold, and familiar, said only one thing. "You've opened the wrong door, Jesse. Now, let's see how far you're willing to go through it." The silence that followed the call was thick enough to suffocate. Jesse sat motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear. Even though the line had gone dead, the voice haunted him, not just because of its calm menace, but because there was something painfully familiar about it, something that tugged at a memory just out of reach. Every instinct told him to run, to disappear, to forget everything he'd learned. But the envelope in his lap, the photograph of his mother's defiance, and the dark trail that had dragged him this far wouldn't let him turn back now. He had stepped over a line that no one was meant to cross, and the only way out was through. Still, it was becoming clearer with every passing moment that this wasn't just about exposing a hidden operation or proving a decades-old conspiracy. This was personal, and the people involved were far more powerful and far more deeply embedded in his life than he could have imagined. Marlene had gone silent since handing him the envelope. She stood by the window now, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jesse watched her closely, the unease growing as he wondered whether she was truly helping him out of guilt, or if this was still part of the game. The deeper he dug, the more people started to blur the lines between victim and villain. And then came the text. This time, it wasn't from a burner number or anonymous source. It was from Lena. "Meet me at the apartment. It's about your mother. Come alone." Jesse's blood went cold. He hadn't spoken to Lena since she found the journal and vanished 2 days ago without explanation. Her sudden silence had left him anxious, and now, out of nowhere, she was beckoning him to return to the place that had sparked the entire unraveling. He didn't hesitate. If she had more information, if she knew something about his mother, he had to find out. The ride back to the complex was torture. Every red light felt like a countdown, every shadow a potential tale. The streets were emptier than they should have been, as if the city itself knew something was about to crack wide open. When Jesse finally reached the building, Lena was waiting just inside the entryway, her face pale, eyes wide with the same fear he'd been feeling for days. She didn't say a word, just handed him a small key and pointed toward the maintenance stairwell. "Third floor," she whispered. "Apartment 3B. Jesse knew the place well. It had been sealed off since a fire 6 years ago. Rumors had swirled that someone had died in there, but no record ever confirmed it. As he unlocked the door, the stale air hit him first, thick with mildew and dust, like time had stood still inside. But then he saw it. Photos taped to the walls. Notes. Strings connecting faces, events, locations. In the center, pinned like the eye of a storm, was a picture of his mother with 3 words written beneath it in bold red ink. "She tried first." And to the right, a photograph of Lena taken 2 days ago from a high angle as if shot from a nearby rooftop. Jesse turned to her, heart racing. "Why didn't you tell me you were being watched?" Lena didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed the room and pulled out a folder from behind a broken drawer. "Because I was told if I did, you'd disappear like she did." Her voice cracked, and Jesse saw real fear, raw and trembling. "They contacted me after the journal. They said I had a choice. Help guide you away from the truth or watch you vanish too." Her eyes met his. I didn't know what to do. Jesse's hands clenched into fists. Betrayal cut deeper than fear. But what choice did she really have? The game was rigged from the start. As he looked around the room, he realized just how big this was. Dozens of names on the wall were people he'd seen over the years. Janitors, realtors, teachers, even the woman who ran the community center. All connected. All somehow tied to Project Demeter. And at the center of the conspiracy, always hovering just out of frame, was the same man in the coat from the surveillance photo. Jesse didn't know who he was yet, but something told him that man was the voice on the phone, and maybe the one who'd orchestrated everything from the start. Before Jesse could speak, Lena grabbed his arm. "There's something else. They made me deliver a message to you. If you stop now, they'll leave you alone. You can walk away. But if you go any further, they'll release everything. Your sealed records, your mother's file, even things about your father you don't know." The ultimatum hit him like a brick. It was no longer just about justice. It was about self-preservation. The threat wasn't vague anymore. It was sharp and direct, and it came with real consequences. He could either keep fighting and risk everything, or bury the truth forever and pretend this never happened. He looked at Lena, not knowing whether to scream at her or thank her. She had lied to him, yes, but maybe she had also saved his life. The room began to feel smaller. The walls seemed to close in, and Jesse's breathing grew shallow. His mind raced with what-ifs and half-formed decisions. Could he live with the truth if it destroyed everything he thought he knew about his family? Could he survive the fallout? Just as he was about to answer, a crash echoed from the hallway. Glass shattered. Heavy footsteps followed. Lena's eyes widened in panic. She grabbed his hand. "We have to go. Now." But Jesse didn't move. He turned back to the wall of faces, to the picture of his mother, to the secrets wrapped in tape and shadows. He knew then, this wasn't just his fight anymore. It never had been. And now that they were here inside, he couldn't run, even if he wanted to. But the real question was no longer if he'd make it out alive. It was whether he'd still recognize himself by the time it was over. The hallway was no longer silent. Voices barked orders through earpieces, boots pounded the floor above, and radios crackled with static and coded phrases Jesse couldn't decipher, but one word kept surfacing over and over: containment. Lena pulled him toward the fire escape, but he hesitated for a split second, eyes darting to the board one last time. He snapped a photo of it with his phone, not even knowing if he'd live long enough to use it. They bolted into the stairwell just as the door burst open behind them, splinters flying, a figure dressed in dark tactical gear flooding the room with blinding light from a mounted flashlight. Shots weren't fired, not yet, but the message was clear. This wasn't a raid. This was an abduction masked in protocol, and whoever was after them had the authority to make Jesse disappear without leaving a trace. By the time they reached the alley behind the complex, Lena was shaking. Her voice trembled. They were watching my apartment, too. I had to leave everything. She kept glancing behind them like someone could appear at any second and drag them away. Jesse's mind was spinning, and not just from the chase. His thoughts kept crawling back to the photo he'd seen in the abandoned apartment. Faces of people he knew, trusted. Names that should have meant nothing, but suddenly connected like roots in poisoned soil. He needed answers. Now. They didn't have many safe places left, but Marlene's bookstore felt like the only option. When they arrived, it was dark, the front locked and empty. Jesse pounded on the back door until the old hinges creaked open and Marlene peered out, disheveled, her hands trembling, phone already in her hand. "What the hell did you do?" she snapped, yanking them inside. "You led them here." Her voice cracked with panic, and something about her tone made Jesse freeze. "I told you to stop digging." That's when everything turned. The room went cold. Jesse stared at her, realization hitting like a punch to the chest. "You warned them," he said quietly. "You've been in contact with them the whole time." Marlene didn't deny it. She exhaled, slow and guilty. "They made me choose. Years ago. When your mother vanished, I was given a deal: stay silent and keep my life, or speak out and lose everything. I thought I could help you from the inside, Jesse. But the truth is bigger than you know. They're not just targeting you. They're wiping out anyone who still remembers what Demeter really was." Jesse stepped back, rage and betrayal tearing through him. "You let them track me. You fed them information. Every move I made. Every piece I uncovered. You watched." "I tried to protect you," she said, tears brimming now. "But they don't just erase people, Jesse. They rewrite them. Project Demeter wasn't a surveillance program. It was behavioral manipulation. Full-cycle personality suppression, tested on hundreds without consent. Your mother wasn't investigating it. She was part of it. A subject. That journal wasn't research. It was recovery. She wrote those entries during the one window of time she was lucid, before they reset her." The words shredded everything Jesse thought he knew. All this time, he had believed his mother was a whistleblower, a victim uncovering the truth. But she had been the experiment. The missing pieces in her journal, the erratic behavior, the blank years, they weren't trauma. They were side effects. And now, everything made sense. The agents weren't looking to stop a leak. They were protecting an operation still in motion. A car screeched outside. Marlene's eyes widened. "It's too late." Jesse grabbed Lena's hand. "We need to split up. If we stay together, we're a target." But Lena didn't move. Her face had gone pale, and she was staring at her phone, a message glowing on the screen. "We have your brother. Final warning." In that instant, the weight of the conspiracy slammed into Jesse like a freight train. This wasn't just about the past, it was still active, still happening. And the people involved weren't just shadow operatives, they were embedded in neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, government offices. The containment was never about cleaning up a project long buried. It was about preventing anyone from realizing it never stopped. The tests continued. The resets. The disappearances. Even the kids today, classified under behavioral programs, psychological evaluations, special education plans, some weren't struggling. Some were being altered. And Jesse had just lit the fuse. Outside, The sound of boots drew closer. The floor above them creaked. Marlene stepped back toward the rear exit. There's a tunnel through the storage room. Leads under the alley.
Go.
I'll stall them. He wanted to hate her, but he couldn't. She had made her impossible choice. Now it was his turn. Jesse didn't wait. He slammed Halvorsen into the metal server bank, hard enough to shatter the screen behind him. Sparks flew. The man crumpled unconscious, or worse. Silence followed. Just the whir of fans spinning and data flying up into the cloud. The world had the truth now, and nothing could stop it. Lena leaned against the wall, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face. Jesse dropped beside her. It's over, she whispered. But Jesse shook his head. No, he said. This was only a node. Just one facility. There are more. And then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line. You found the first gate. Now, let's see if you're ready for the second. Jesse's eyes met Lena's. She read it too. The victory was real, but fleeting. The game was bigger than they ever imagined. Weeks passed. Not peacefully, but with the strange, weightless disorientation of someone who had come back from a place they were never meant to escape. Jesse sat alone on the edge of a rocky overlook just outside the town where he'd grown up, if it could still be called his childhood. The valley below was blanketed in early fog, the world quiet but not still, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe without looking over his shoulder. The files Lena had uploaded, every detail, every grotesque page of Demeter's operation, had exploded across the internet like wildfire. Major news outlets ran specials titled Mind Control in America, Hidden Government Experiments Exposed, and How Real is Behavioral Programming? YouTube was ablaze with commentary, deep dives, reaction videos, and live streams connecting that had long been buried beneath decades of silence. Trending searches ranged from neural manipulation programs to psychological warfare on civilians to truth about Project Demeter. Even podcasts were breaking down every detail of Jesse's leaked video in real time, trying to decode what parts were science fiction and what parts were real. But he knew it was all real, because he'd lived it. And yet, after all the exposure, subpoenas, protests, and congressional hearings, there hadn't been a single arrest. Not one. The public demanded answers, demanded justice, but the system knew how to hide its rot beneath 10 layers of plausible deniability. Those responsible had melted into the shadows like mist evaporating before morning light, leaving behind nothing but redacted documents and corrupted files. Halvorsen had disappeared from the hospital 2 days after being taken in. No signs of forced entry, no trace of exit. His room had been stripped, his floor dripping into an empty bed. All that remained was a small note taped to the underside of Jesse's old phone case, mailed back to him with no return address. The message was typed, impersonal, like so many before it, and yet it hit deeper than any wound. You can't delete what we've already rewritten. Lena had gone quiet after the broadcast, choosing to return to her family upstate. She sent Jesse the occasional encrypted message, photos of a dog she'd adopted, an article she found disturbing, a memory she feared had been tampered with. They had become more than allies, but less than lovers, bound not by romance, but by something more primal. Survival.
Truth. Trauma.
She had been the one person who had seen every corner of his story and still stood beside him when the lights went out. Jesse had changed. The man who once believed in logic and evidence had learned that sometimes the answers were less important than the questions. That truth could be fractured, twisted, designed. He often found himself replaying the confrontation in that underground facility, not just because of the danger, but because of what it revealed. He hadn't just uncovered a conspiracy. He discovered himself, or at least the version of himself that refused to be controlled. The memory of his mother had returned in fragmented waves, moments of warmth, a lullaby, a look of terror that now made more sense than ever. She hadn't run away. She'd tried to save him, and in the end, he'd done what she couldn't, break the chain. But as he sat there, phone buzzing again with alerts about a new wave of leaks, this time out of Eastern Europe, another alleged neural testing lab unearthed in the mountains, he realized that the story wasn't finished.
Not really.
There were others out there like him. Subjects who didn't even know they were subjects. Families who'd been torn apart, rewritten, replaced. He wondered how many people were walking around, living lives that weren't truly theirs, memories curated like playlists, identities shaped to serve someone else's agenda. And though he didn't have the answers, Jesse had made peace with the idea that some questions were meant to stay open. That the human spirit wasn't in knowing everything, it was in refusing to stop asking. As the sun finally pierced the fog and bathed the valley in golden light, he stood up, phone in hand, and made his way down the hill. The path was uncertain, the danger likely not over. But something in him had changed forever. Because he had faced the abyss and walked out still asking why. And somewhere someone was still watching, still waiting. Because this story, it wasn't just about Jesse. It was about all of us.